I just wanted to say that I feel really proud to be working with you.
What do you say we call him Little Joe? You have to take good care of it.
Haven't you noticed how Chris has changed?
If I made a mistake, then it's my fault.
It seems that this has all been a bit much for you.
He frightens me. Good night, Little Joe.
In the first shots, we see a laboratory where flowers with antidepressant effects are being grown. It is assumed that this project will change the life of humanity. The scent of these amazing plants makes people happy. A boy named Joe is waiting for his mother, who works in the laboratory, to finish. Her colleague, Chris, said that Alice will come soon. Finally, Alice and her son got ready to go home. As usual, they were going to have dinner together. Alice told her son that his father wants to spend the next weekend with him. Joe doesn't like this idea. He prefers to spend time with his mother, but agreed to meet with the father for her sake. Soon Alice had a psychotherapy session. She is very worried about the project. Anything could go wrong at any moment. Alice is used to keeping everything under control. She is also worried that she can't always be with her son. Her work comes first, and that's not right. A woman named Bella came to work with her favorite pet as usual. In the laboratory, the scientists are breeding several subtypes of the antidepressant plant. The temperature regime must be carefully controlled. Chris told Alice that he's happy to work with her and offered to have a drink after work, but Alice refused. Joe has an unusual hobby. He breeds ants. Today the mother decided to give him an unusual gift, a flower from the laboratory. It is forbidden, but Alice used her official position to please her son. She explained that this special flower needs to be well taken care of and talked to. Only then will it give them happiness. Alice suggested naming the flower Little Joe. In the morning, the scientists discovered that most of the blue flowers had died. On the contrary, the red ones felt good. Later, Alice explained to her colleagues that they deliberately made Little Joe sterile. These flowers are unable to reproduce. This was necessary to achieve the maximum scent. Some are concerned that Little Joe is uncontrollably releasing pollen, as if it has a will of its own. Perhaps that's why the second type died. Bella believes that a sterile plant is unnatural. In her opinion, the ability to reproduce is the main stimulus for all living things. The management is concerned that Little Joe's pollen may contain allergens. Until further notice, Carl ordered everyone to wear protective masks. The second subspecies of flowers has completely died out. After work, Chris suggested Alice have a drink again. Bella looked upset. It turns out her pet is missing. Chris went to check if the dog was locked in the greenhouse. Suddenly the flowers started to bloom. The dog attacked Chris, and he fell. The pollen got on his hand. As he left the greenhouse, Chris was in a detached state. Later, he drank with Alice at the bar. Chris wanted to kiss her, but she wasn't ready for it. The dog started to behave very restlessly and seemed to be afraid of something. When the beloved pet bit Bella, she couldn't take it and cried. The woman is convinced that it is no longer her dog. During the lunch break, the colleagues told Alice, who recently started working here, that Bella has mental health problems. She was on sick leave for a whole year. Out of pity, Carl hired her as an assistant. Joe took a photo of his aunts and sent it to his classmate Selma, hoping to impress her. But the girl called him a nerd. Then the boy took a selfie with the flower, which began to bloom. Selma found it intriguing. Joe takes care of the flower conscientiously and talks to it. The plant continues to bloom. Inhaling the pollen, Joe sneezed. As often happens, Alice was delayed at work. She immediately noticed that her son was behaving very strangely. The boy was cold and detached, which was unusual for him. The next day, Bella said she got rid of her dog. According to her, the pet had become different. In the evening, Bella came to Alice's house, who was very surprised by the colleague's unexpected visit. Bella said that the dog was like a son to her, but something changed it. Bella is convinced that it happened because of Little Joe's pollen. It's not an allergy, it's something else. Alice found this theory insane and baseless, but Bella continues to insist on her own. In addition, she is convinced that Chris is also infected, so he will defend little Joe at all costs. Alice did not believe a word her colleague said, but nevertheless doubts crept into her head. She shared her worries with the psychotherapist. The doctor thinks that Bella came up with this theory to explain the changes in the dog's behavior and somehow justify her decision to get rid of the pet. Carl is outraged that scientists planted new flowers before conducting allergen tests. Then Alice said that she has little Joe at home and neither she nor her son feel any allergy symptoms. Of course, Carl was very unhappy that Alice took the flower from the laboratory without the management's knowledge. But time is running out. They need to grow the flowers before the exhibition, or their competitors will have a similar idea. Alice scolded Chris for not telling her about growing a new batch of plants. Chris asked her to trust him. Alice is watching interviews of people participating in a laboratory study as volunteers. It turns out that some subjects have experienced significant changes in their behavior. Joe spends time with his father fishing. The man tries to start a conversation, noticing that the son is acting strangely. Soon the father brought him home. The man is concerned that Joe has changed a lot lately. However, Alice said she hadn't noticed anything unusual. Of course, this was a lie. In fact, Alice is finding it increasingly difficult to communicate with her son. At night, when the mother fell asleep, Joe sneaked into her room and stole something. After that, he met Selma at the bus stop, offering her to go to the laboratory. With the help of the pass he stole from Alice, they were able to get inside. Selma was amazed at Joe's bravery and smelled the flowers, inhaling their pollen. Noticing someone, the teenagers hid. At that moment, the flowers began to actively release pollen. The next day, the scientists noticed that one flower was missing. Someone broke into the laboratory, and hiding from the surveillance cameras, took the plant. Alice had a guess, but she didn't say it out loud. Later, Bella approached her again, expressing another crazy guess. In her opinion, little Joe infects people to reproduce. This is a response to sterility. Little Joe infects people so that they take care of it and spread it. Handing Alice a flash drive, Bella left. In the evening, Alice watched the full versions of the subject interviews. It turns out that the changes in behavior were much more significant than it are positioned. Inhaling little Joe's pollen, people become different. Upon hearing voices, Alice went to the son's room to check if everything was okay. She was surprised to see Selma there, as her son had never brought any girls home before. Alice invited Selma to stay for dinner, which she happily accepted. Alice immediately noticed that the teenagers were behaving strangely. She wanted to ask if they had taken her past to the laboratory, but Joe interrupted her by stating that he wanted to live with the father. The boy didn't like that the mother was always working and not paying attention to him. Alice told him that it was out of the question. In a burst of emotion, the son was about to leave the house. When Alice tried to stop him, he rudely pushed her away. The teenagers take care of little Joe together. Alice begins to realize that Bella may have been right. In addition, Alice noticed that his ants were missing from the son's aquarium. Joe only replied that he couldn't keep an eye on it all. Entering the greenhouse, Rick notices that the temperature is misadjusted, which could pose a threat to the plants. Rick believes that Bella did this intentionally to cause all the flowers to die. Alice shared her concerns with Chris. However, he believed that her fears were unfounded. In his opinion, the changes in the behavior of some people were due to other reasons. Alice worries about the son, who has been distancing himself from her lately. Chris promised to talk to him. Alice came to pick up the son from school, but Joe ignored her and walked away on foot. However, a few minutes later, the boy got into the car as if nothing had happened. Alice told Joe that she wanted to take a day off work to spend time with him, but Joe said he already had plans. Rick needs to leave urgently, so he asked Bella to feed the plants in his absence. Having received the access code from her colleague, Bella entered the greenhouse without any problems. After doing everything necessary and getting ready to leave, the woman could not open the door. It was already late, and there was no one in the laboratory. The flowers began to bloom. Bella desperately tried to escape. Finally, She managed to open the sash and started to climb out of the greenhouse, but at the last moment she turned around. The next day, Alice called out to her, asking if she was okay. Bella apologized for scaring her. To Alice's surprise, the woman admitted that the virus transmitted through little Joe's pollen was just a product of her imagination. Puzzled, Alice came back to the psychotherapist for another consultation. She believes that Bella has inhaled the pollen and now she is also protecting the flower. The same thing happens to Joe. When Alice left, the doctor made a recording on her dictaphone. In her opinion, the patient is a chronic workaholic, so she feels guilty towards her son. Returning home from work, Alice felt anxious. Now every meeting with Joe scares her. Meanwhile, Chris talked to Joe and Selma as he promised. Alice did not expect to see her colleague here and realized that something was wrong. She asked Chris to leave. The guy confessed his love to her. He also said that Joe is perfectly fine, which cannot be said about Alice herself. Later, she asked the teenagers directly why they went to the greenhouse. The son admitted that he wanted to take a flower for his father so that he too could inhale the pollen and become one of them. According to the boy, anyone who inhales this pollen will experience absolute happiness. Therefore, they intend to protect little Joe at any cost. Alice was shocked by this statement. At some point, the teenagers laughed, saying that they were just joking. Joe reassured the mother and assured her that all his changes are related to growing up. The boy wants to spend more time with his father, and this is absolutely normal. Later, when Selma left, Alice hugged her son, saying that she would always love him. The next day, she shared her concerns about little Joe with Carl. She is convinced that the possible consequences could turn into a disaster. Infected people experience absolute happiness, but they are not concerned about anything except the flower. Carl asked Alice to take samples and send them for testing to another laboratory. That's exactly what Alice did. Seeing her pet's ball, Bella burst into tears, feeling guilty. During lunch break, she loudly announced that her dog was the only creature she loved. Bella did not inhale the pollen but only pretended, as she always did. The woman also stated that those who are infected have already lost their individuality. Carl tried to calm the employee down and asked if she was continuing her treatment. Bella said she didn't need a doctor and left. A few minutes later, the woman attempted to voluntarily pass away in front of her colleagues. Soon Carl gave a speech in front of the scientists in support of Bella, who is currently fighting for her life in the hospital. But there is good news too. Test results confirm that little Joe is absolutely safe. Therefore, protective masks are no longer needed. Alice pretended that everything was fine. After the workday, when all the employees had left, she stayed in the greenhouse and lowered the temperature to get rid of the plants. Suddenly Chris came in, worried that Alice might do something foolish. Feeling the cold in the greenhouse, Chris immediately understood what Alice was up to and tried to take the key from her. A struggle broke out between them. At some point, Chris knocked out Alice and immediately adjusted the temperature in the greenhouse. After that, he removed Alice's protective mask so that she could inhale the pollen. Soon Carl announced that little Joe had been nominated for the European Health Award. The laboratory had already received a huge number of orders from all over the world, including schools. Later, Chris apologized to Alice for what had happened in the laboratory. Alice kissed him. At home, she told her son that she doesn't mind if he lives with his father. By the way, little Joe has blossomed. Alice helped the son move his things. Her ex-husband thought it was the right decision. Alice is a good mother, but an even better scientist solicitor. At her next therapy session, Alice said she had been misled. But now she knows for sure that little Joe is absolutely safe. She just felt guilty all this time for wanting to spend more time on work than on her son. Now the flower is everywhere. In the last shots we see Alice saying goodbye.